When you hear the name Walmart, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's an image so deeply woven into the fabric of modern life that it's almost invisible. It's the vast, brightly lit cavern of a supercenter on the edge of town, a universe of seemingly endless aisles under one roof. It's the familiar blue and yellow spark, a symbol of a promise kept for millions that your dollar will stretch further here than anywhere else. It is the very idea of the American bargain, a place of relentless, democratic affordability. We see the gleaming floors, the stacked pallets of goods, the friendly greeter at the door. It's a landscape of such profound ordinariness that we rarely stop to consider the extraordinary, almost terrifying power behind it. We see a store, but what we're really looking at is the public face of the wealthiest family dynasty on earth. This is the story of the Waltons, a name that has become synonymous with a fortune so immense it defies comprehension, an empire built one low-priced can of soup, one discounted television, one roll of paper towels at a time. Their collective wealth doesn't just rival that of other billionaires, it eclipses the gross domestic product of entire developed nations. We see the quiet, unassuming town of Bentonville, Arkansas, transformed into a global corporate capital. We see magnificent art museums rising from the Ozark Hills, and a political influence that silently shapes the laws that govern us all. But what if I told you the real story of the Walton family is not one of simple, homespun success? What if it's a saga of ruthless, almost surgical ambition? What if it's a story of communities systematically hollowed out, of a workforce engineered to exist in a state of perpetual precarity, and of a bargain made with the American consumer that came with a hidden, devastating cost that we are all still paying? Today we are pulling back the curtain on America's most powerful and enigmatic family. We're going beyond the rollback signs and into the boardrooms, the back offices, and the private lives of the people who built this empire. This is the story of how a child of the Great Depression harnessed the soul of American consumerism to become a global king, and how the dynasty he forged has become both the ultimate symbol of the American dream and its most profound and unsettling cautionary tale. This is the Walton Dynasty, the richest family in America, and the dark secret behind Walmart's bargain. To understand the world-altering force that Walmart would become, you must first transport yourself to an America on its knees, a nation scarred and humbled by the Great Depression. Imagine the world into which Samuel Moore Walton was born in 1918 in the small town of Kingfisher, Oklahoma. This was a nation where the American dream felt like a distant, cruel mirage. The air was thick with the dust of the heartland, carrying the scent of hardship and the quiet desperation of families who had lost everything. It was a world of small towns where life revolved around a fragile local economy built on Main Street. The grocer, the pharmacist, the hardware store owner, these weren't just merchants. They were pillars of a community, their fortunes intertwined with those of their neighbors. It was an era that worshiped frugality, grit, and a relentless work ethic, not as virtues, but as tools for sheer survival. Sam Walton was the quintessential product of this age. He was not born into wealth or privilege. His father, Thomas Gibson Walton, was a farmer who lost everything and was forced to become a farm appraiser and mortgage agent, a grim job that often meant repossessing the farms of his friends and neighbors. For a young boy like Sam, this was a profound daily lesson in the fragility of fortune. He saw firsthand the shame and despair in the eyes of families who had worked the land for generations, only to lose it all over a few missed payments. It was a profession that kept the family clothed and fed, but instilled in young Sam a deep-seated, almost pathological fear of debt and a first-hand understanding of financial ruin. The family was constantly on the move, chasing stability across Missouri, a rootless existence that taught Sam to be adaptable, charming, and perpetually hungry. His mother, Nancy Lee, was a woman of boundless, almost suffocating ambition. She saw in her eldest son the vehicle for the success the world had denied her, and she instilled in him a burning, all-consuming desire not just to compete, but to dominate. To be second best was, in her eyes, a form of failure. She once told him, "It's not whether you win or lose, but I'd just as soon you won," a phrase that perfectly captured her relentless drive. This drive manifested itself early. From the moment he could walk, Sam was a hustler. He milked the family cow, bottled the surplus, and sold it to a network of customers, meticulously tracking his profits in a little notebook. He took on a newspaper delivery route, and then another and another, until he was managing a small army of delivery boys. He discovered he could be more efficient by learning to throw the papers with both his right and left hands, a small but telling example of the obsession with process optimization that would later define his empire. In high school, he wasn't just a student. He was a phenomenon. He was the star quarterback for the undefeated Hickman High School football team, a gifted basketball player, and was elected class president. At the University of Missouri, he waited tables in exchange for meals and managed the campus magazine subscription drive, all while being tapped for one of the most prestigious student honor societies. He was handsome, relentlessly optimistic, and possessed a folksy charm that could win over anyone. But beneath the easy grin was a mind that was always calculating, always observing, always looking for an edge. He was a human sponge for ideas, a man who saw the world as a system to be understood, streamlined, and ultimately conquered. After graduating with a degree in economics in 1940, he took a job as a management trainee at a J.C. Penney store in Des Moines, Iowa, for $75 a month. It was here that he had his first formal education in the science of retail. He was a notoriously poor employee when it came to paperwork, often messing up the simplest of sales reports. But he was a natural on the sales floor. He loved the human interaction, the challenge of making a sale. In a famous and perhaps apocryphal story, the founder, James Cash Penney himself, visited the store and was impressed by Sam's energy, but chided him for his sloppy gift wrapping. Sam's philosophy was already forming. The connection with the customer trumped everything else. His career was interrupted by World War II, where he served as a captain in the U.S. Army Intelligence Corps, overseeing security for aircraft plants and prisoner of war camps. The experience was transformative. He was tasked with ensuring that thousands of moving parts, people, supplies, and protocols worked in perfect harmony to prevent sabotage. It taught him the critical importance of logistics, security, and, most importantly, the power of standardized systems and unwavering discipline. When he returned to civilian life in 1945, he was a man with a singular, unshakable focus. He wanted his own store. He was not an inventor in the mold of a Thomas Edison or a Henry Ford. He had no interest in creating a new product. His genius, rather, was that of a supreme synthesizer and perfectionist. He believed he could take the existing model of retail and run it better, more efficiently, and more profitably than anyone else. With a $20,000 loan from his father-in-law, a sum that terrified him, he and his wife Helen purchased a Ben Franklin five and dime franchise in the small, unassuming cotton town of Newport, Arkansas. He was 27 years old. This little store in Newport became Sam's crucible, his personal laboratory for the revolution to come. He and Helen poured every ounce of their being into it. Sam was a whirlwind of energy, a man possessed. He would wake before dawn, obsessing over sales figures and inventory reports. He read every trade journal he could find, hungry for any new idea. On his days off, he wouldn't rest. He would get in his car and drive hundreds of miles to spy on rival stores, a practice he called bird dogging. He would walk the aisles of a Sears or a J.C. Penney, not as a customer, but as a student, shamelessly sketching out their store layouts, noting their pricing strategies, and analyzing their merchandising techniques. But it wasn't just about price. Sam turned his store into a destination, an event. He was one of the first merchants in the area to install a soft-serve ice cream machine and a popcorn popper right at the front of the store. The smell of fresh popcorn would drift out onto the street, drawing people in. He understood a fundamental truth. Shopping should be a little bit of entertainment. He began experimenting with a simple but radical idea. The Ben Franklin franchise model dictated that he had to buy at least 80% of his goods from their approved wholesaler, who marked everything up. Sam saw this as an inefficiency. He began making secret trips to Tennessee, buying truckloads of cheap lingerie and other goods directly from manufacturers, cutting out the middleman. He then piled the merchandise high on tables at the front of his store and sold it for a fraction of the price of his competitors. The town went wild. He discovered a fundamental law of retail physics. You could dramatically increase your sales volume by accepting a razor-thin profit margin. His store was a sensation, and in just 3 years, he had more than tripled its sales, making it the #1 Ben Franklin franchise in the entire state of Arkansas. He had found the magic formula, but then just as he was tasting the fruits of his relentless labor, disaster struck. It was a lesson in the brutal realities of power that would forever shape his worldview and the DNA of the company he would build. The man from whom he had leased the store building, his landlord, saw the river of cash flowing through the little 5 and dime. He recognized the gold mine he was sitting on. When the 5-year lease came up for renewal, the landlord refused to extend it at any price. Instead, he paid Sam a paltry sum for the store's fixtures and inventory, and announced he was giving the wildly profitable business to his own son. Sam Walton, the boy wonder of the Ben Franklin Corporation, was unceremoniously kicked out of his own success. He was devastated. Helen, pregnant with their 4th child, was heartbroken at the thought of leaving the first real home they had ever known. Sam had built the business from nothing, only to have it snatched away by a man who held a single piece of paper. In that moment of profound betrayal, Sam Walton made a solemn vow. Never again would he be at the mercy of another man. From that day forward, he would control everything, most especially the real estate. Forced to start over, he, Helen, and their young family packed their bags. Their search for a new town was not random. It was a carefully considered family decision. Helen, tired of their nomadic life, laid down the law. She wanted to settle in a town with a population of less than 10,000, a place where they could put down roots and raise their children. After scouring the region, they settled on Bentonville, a sleepy, dusty town square community in the northwest corner of Arkansas. It was small enough for Helen, and it was perfectly situated for Sam, with easy access to good hunting grounds. To the outside world, it was the middle of nowhere. To Sam, it was a blank canvas. He opened a new store on the town square, this time making sure to secure a 99-year lease. He called it Waltons 5 and 10. It was here, in this unassuming backwater town, that the seeds of a global empire were truly sown. For the next decade, Sam, along with his younger brother James Bud Walton, who had joined him as his indispensable partner, honed their craft. Bud was the quiet anchor to Sam's visionary storm. While Sam was the charismatic front man, obsessed with merchandising and sales. Bud was the nuts and bolts expert who scouted locations, negotiated leases, and oversaw the construction of new stores. Together, they opened a string of successful variety stores across Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas. Sam was a master of grassroots retail, but he was also a keen observer of the changing American landscape. He saw the rise of the suburbs, the transformative power of the automobile, and the emergence of a new revolutionary force in retail, the discount store. He began making pilgrimages not just to his nearby competitors, but across the country. He traveled to the East Coast to study Ann and Hope, one of the very first discount department stores. He went to Minnesota to see the first Target store. Most importantly, he went to San Diego, California to meet a man named Sol Price, the founder of a membership club called FedMart. Price was a retail visionary, and Sam was captivated by his model of high-volume, low-margin, no-frills merchandising. Sam later admitted, "I guess I've stolen, I actually prefer the word borrowed, as many ideas from Sol Price as from anybody else in the business." He watched with a mixture of envy and fascination as companies like Kmart and Woolco began to find explosive success in large metropolitan areas, building massive stores that offered nationally recognized brands at prices the old department stores couldn't match. Sam was convinced he could not only replicate that model, but perfect it. More importantly, he had a radical, counterintuitive insight that would become the cornerstone of his empire. The experts in their gleaming New York City skyscrapers all agreed that the discount model could only work in heavily populated urban centers. Sam believed they were all wrong. He believed the real, untapped market was in the places everyone else was ignoring. The small rural towns of America, communities with populations of 5,000 to 25,000 people. These were the towns where the local merchants had a comfortable monopoly, where the customer had limited choice and paid higher prices. Sam believed that if he could bring big city prices to small-town America, he would unleash a tidal wave of consumer demand. He took his idea to the executives at the Ben Franklin Corporation, pitching them a new partnership to build a chain of discount stores across the heartland. They laughed him out of the room. It was too risky, they said. The margins were too thin. The towns were too small. It couldn't be done. It was the Newport story all over again. Once again, the established powers had told him no. And so, once again, he decided to do it himself. On July 2nd, 1962, in the nearby town of Rogers, Arkansas, the 44-year-old Sam Walton, a man the titans of the industry had dismissed as a small-town country merchant, opened the first store to bear the name Walmart. It was a crude, humble affair. The sign was made of cheap, mismatched letters he'd bought from another store. The flooring was bare concrete. The shelves were unpainted wooden planks propped up on cinder blocks. On opening day, the big draw was a truckload of watermelons for sale on the sidewalk and a pen of live donkeys for the kids to ride. But inside that ugly, unremarkable building was the beating heart of a revolution. Inside was a promise that would change the face of the world forever. National brands at prices the people of Rogers, Arkansas, had never seen before. The age of the Titan had truly begun. The early decades of Walmart were not a story of corporate glamour. They were a story of a guerrilla war fought in the back roads and forgotten towns of the American heartland. Sam Walton was the obsessive, charismatic general, and his strategy was built upon a holy trinity of principles that, when combined, created a business machine of such brutal efficiency that it would lay waste to the entire retail landscape. The first and most sacred of these principles was everyday low prices. This was not merely a marketing slogan. It was a quasi-religious doctrine, the central, unshakable dogma of the Church of Walmart. Sam believed that the traditional retail model of periodic sales and promotions was dishonest. It trained the customer to wait for a discount. He argued that by offering the lowest possible price every single day, Walmart would earn something far more valuable than a quick sale. They would earn the customer's absolute unwavering trust. To achieve this, he turned the company into a relentless engine of cost-cutting. He famously told his executives, "Every time we spend $1 foolishly, it comes right out of our customers' pockets." This wasn't just talk. The corporate culture became fanatically frugal. Executives flew coach, were forced to share cheap motel rooms on business trips, often with 3 or 4 to a room, and worked out of a famously Spartan headquarters in Bentonville that looked more like a drab warehouse than the nerve center of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Sam personally reviewed every line of the company's expenses and woe betide the manager who couldn't justify a purchase. This obsession with cost was most powerfully projected onto his suppliers. Sam Walton transformed the relationship between retailer and manufacturer from a partnership into a gladiatorial contest. He bypassed wholesalers and went straight to the source, using Walmart's rapidly growing scale as a blunt instrument. The Bentonville summons became a dreaded ritual in corporate America. Executives from giants like Procter and Gamble or General Electric would be forced to fly to rural Arkansas, where they were put in a small windowless room with a buyer who knew their business better than they did. These Walmart buyers would systematically dismantle their pricing structures, demanding to know the manufacturer's own cost for raw materials, for labor, for shipping. Then they would tell them what price Walmart was willing to pay. A legendary example of this power was the story of Vlasic pickles. The pickle maker had a comfortable business selling jars of pickles. Walmart came to them with a demand. They wanted to sell a massive 1-gallon jar of whole pickles for just $2.97. Vlasic's executives knew it was a terrible idea. They would make virtually no profit on such a product, but they were terrified of losing Walmart's business, which already accounted for a huge portion of their sales. So they reluctantly agreed. The gallon jar of pickles was a sensation at Walmart, flying off the shelves. But for Vlasic, it was a catastrophe. Customers who bought the gallon jar didn't need to buy pickles again for months, cannibalizing the sales of their other, more profitable products. The deal nearly drove the company into bankruptcy. It was a brutal lesson that was repeated across hundreds of industries. You did business on Walmart's terms, or you didn't do business at all. One by one, the great manufacturing titans of the 20th century were forced to bend the knee to the country merchant from Arkansas. He framed this relentless pressure not as corporate bullying, but as a noble crusade. "We're not buying for us," he would say. "We're buying for our customers." The second pillar of the empire was a mastery of logistics and technology that was years, if not decades, ahead of its time. While competitors like Kmart were haphazardly dotting the country with stores and then struggling to build a supply chain to support them, Sam did the exact opposite. He started with a supply chain. He built massive state-of-the-art distribution centers in the middle of nowhere, and then, with almost military precision, he built his stores in a tight radius around them, like spokes on a wheel. This hub and spoke model was a work of genius. Inside these centers, he perfected a logistical innovation called cross-docking. Instead of goods being delivered by a supplier and stored for weeks in a warehouse, they were unloaded on one side of the building, immediately sorted, and then loaded onto outbound Walmart trucks on the other side, often without ever touching a storage shelf. This system slashed inventory costs and dramatically slashed transportation time, allowing stores to be restocked not in weeks, but in a matter of days. A product could arrive at a distribution center, be sorted, loaded onto a Walmart-owned truck, and be on a store shelf within 48 hours. He coupled this physical efficiency with a revolutionary embrace of technology. Long before big data became a buzzword, Sam Walton was obsessed with it. In the 1980s, he invested hundreds of millions of dollars in what would become the largest private satellite communication system in the world. This system connected every single cash register in every single store directly to the headquarters in Bentonville in real time. From his unassuming office, Sam could see precisely what was selling, where it was selling, and when it was selling. He knew the moment a particular brand of toothpaste started flying off the shelves in Peoria, Illinois. This fire hose of data gave Walmart an almost clairvoyant ability to predict consumer demand, manage inventory, and exert even more pressure on its suppliers. They used it to tailor the product mix of each store to its specific local market. And in a masterstroke, they began sharing this data selectively with their biggest suppliers like Procter & Gamble, essentially deputizing them to manage their own inventory on Walmart's shelves. This created a deeply codependent relationship, locking suppliers into their ecosystem and giving Walmart even more control. They didn't just know what their customers wanted, they knew it before their competitors even knew there was a question. But the third, and perhaps most potent element of his formula, was the unique and often cult-like company culture he forged. Sam Walton was a master of human motivation, a blend of country preacher and five-star general. He understood that to win the loyalty of a low-wage workforce, you had to give them something more than a paycheck. He called his employees associates, a simple but psychologically powerful choice of words that suggested partnership, not servitude. He introduced one of the first broad-based profit-sharing plans in the industry, linking the financial success of even the hourly stock boy to the performance of the company. He created a stock purchase plan that allowed employees to buy into the company at a discount, turning thousands of early loyal associates into millionaires. He drilled into his managers the philosophy of servant leadership, the idea that their job was not to command, but to serve the frontline associates so that they could better serve the ultimate boss, the customer. He was a constant, almost mythical presence in his stores. He would fly his own rickety prop plane from town to town, landing on dirt airstrips if he had to. He'd walk into a store unannounced, often at dawn, to chat with the overnight stocking crew. He was famous for getting down on his hands and knees in the middle of an aisle to see if there was dust under the shelves. He would challenge store managers to impromptu contests to see who could greet the most customers at the door in an hour. He would gather the employees in the break room for impromptu pep talks, always asking them for their ideas. He instituted the legendary Saturday morning meeting at the Bentonville headquarters, a bizarre and uniquely Waltonian ritual. It was part business review, part revival meeting, and part vaudeville show. Executives would be forced to present their weekly sales numbers in front of hundreds of their peers, while Sam would pace the stage, grilling them on every detail. The meetings would feature goofy skits, like a senior vice president having to wear a grass skirt and do the hula as punishment for a bad business bet, and would always end with the infamous Walmart cheer. Give me a W, give me an A, give me an L. It was cheesy, it was corny, but it was also incredibly effective. It fostered a powerful sense of shared identity, a feeling that they were all part of a special underdog family on a mission to save the world money. This carefully cultivated internal culture was mirrored by an equally brilliant external persona. Sam Walton even after he became one of the richest men in the world, masterfully projected an image of a humble, folksy country boy. He continued to drive a battered old Ford pickup truck, its bed filled with cages for his bird dogs. He wore a simple Walmart baseball cap, got his hair cut at the local barber shop, and lived in the same modest ranch-style house in Bentonville that he and Helen had bought in the 1950s. This image was, in itself, a stroke of marketing genius. It made him relatable. It made his customers feel that he was one of them, a man who understood the value of a hard-earned dollar because he lived it himself. He wasn't some remote, out-of-touch CEO in a skyscraper. He was just Mr. Sam. The growth that resulted from this perfectly synchronized machine was nothing short of explosive. By 1980, just 18 years after its founding, Walmart had 276 stores and had passed the billion-dollar mark in annual sales. By the early 1990s, it had surpassed its old rivals, Sears and Kmart, to become the largest and most profitable retailer in the United States. Sam Walton's radical bet on small-town America had paid off on a scale that was almost unimaginable. He had created a machine that was perfectly calibrated to the soul of the American consumer, a machine that promised more for less, a machine that seemed benevolent, unstoppable, and quintessentially American. But as this machine grew ever larger and more powerful, its shadow grew longer and darker. The very principles that had propelled Walmart to such breathtaking success, its fanatical obsession with low cost, its ruthless efficiency, and its overwhelming market power, were beginning to reveal a devastating and deeply hidden underside. The American dream that Sam Walton had so brilliantly packaged and sold was, for a growing number of Americans, beginning to look like a trap. For decades, the story of Walmart was a modern American fable, a triumphant tale of ingenuity and grit. But as the 1980s bled into the 1990s, a counter-narrative began to emerge. It was whispered at first, in the shuttered storefronts of dying main streets, then spoken in the worried tones of labor activists, and finally shouted in newspaper headlines and congressional hearings. It was the story of the true cost of those everyday low prices. A cost that wasn't printed on any receipt. It was a cost paid by communities, by workers, by suppliers, and by the very structure of the American economy. The first and most visible casualty of Walmart's relentless march across the country was the American small town. The strategy that Sam Walton had perfected was, in retrospect, a form of economic shock and awe. It was a carefully planned invasion, executed with military precision. First came the reconnaissance, as Walmart's secretive real estate division would quietly buy up a large parcel of land on the edge of town. Then came the public relations blitz. Company representatives would arrive at town hall meetings, armed with slick presentations and easy smiles. They would promise jobs, hundreds of them. They would promise a bigger tax base to fund schools and roads. And most powerfully, they would promise to save the families in that community money, a message that resonated deeply in the struggling heartland. But when the massive 200,000 square foot Walmart supercenter finally opened with its vast selection and predatory pricing, it acted like a retail neutron bomb. It didn't just compete with the local businesses, it systematically annihilated them. The family-owned grocery store, which had served the community for generations, simply couldn't compete with Walmart's global supply chain and its ability to sell milk and bread as loss leaders. The local hardware store, run by a family who knew their customers by name, couldn't match Walmart's prices on tools and garden supplies. The downtown pharmacy, the independent bookstore, the clothing boutique, the shoe store, one by one, they would flicker and die. This phenomenon became so common and so predictable, it was given a name by economists and sociologists, the Walmart effect. In a landmark study, Iowa State University professor Kenneth Stone meticulously documented this process. He tracked retail sales in small towns across Iowa for a decade, before and after a Walmart arrived. His findings were devastating. Within 10 years of a Walmart opening, a small town could expect to lose up to half of its retail trade. The local general merchandise store saw its sales plummet by an average of 40%. Apparel stores lost 30%. Pharmacies lost 18%. To see this process in human terms, you only need to look at the story of Hearne, Texas. In the early 1980s, Hearne was a classic small Texas town. Its downtown was a vibrant hub of locally owned businesses. There was a Ben Franklin Five and Dime, a local pharmacy, several grocers, and family-owned clothing stores. Then, Walmart came to town. The initial promise was seductive. The new store offered a dazzling variety of goods under one roof, at prices people had only ever seen in big city circulars. For a while, it felt like progress. But slowly, inevitably, the erosion began. The Ben Franklin, unable to compete, was the first to go. Then the clothing stores, one by one, put up going out of business signs. The local grocers held on for as long as they could, but they were eventually bled dry. Within a few years, downtown Hearne was a shadow of its former self, its storefronts empty and boarded up. Walmart had created about 150 jobs, but the town had lost more than 200 from the businesses that had closed, and the new jobs paid significantly less than the old ones had. The devastating truth was that the Walmart effect was not just a retail phenomenon, it was a societal one. The company didn't just take the customers, it dismantled the entire economic ecosystem of a community. When the local hardware store closed, the local newspaper lost a major advertiser. When the downtown businesses failed, the local bank lost its most reliable commercial clients. The town's tax base, which Walmart had promised to expand, often shrank as the assessed value of the now empty commercial properties on Main Street plummeted. The local civic leaders, the very people who had run the stores, sponsored the Little League teams, and led the town council, were gone. All that social and economic capital built up over generations was replaced by a single, massive, anonymous box on the highway, managed by people who were transferred in from out of state every few years and whose profits were siphoned out of the community and sent directly back to Bentonville. An even darker chapter was being written inside the walls of the stores themselves. From its earliest days, the Walton family maintained an iron-fisted, almost pathological opposition to organized labor. To them, a union was a cancer, a third party that interfered with their ability to control their most crucial variable, labor costs. To defend against this perceived threat, the company developed one of the most sophisticated and ruthless anti-union systems in the history of American business. This wasn't just a policy, it was a form of psychological warfare waged against their own employees. A 24-hour hotline was established for managers to call at the first whisper of union activity. A rapid response team of executives and labor lawyers from Bentonville would be dispatched on a corporate jet, descending on the store to systematically educate employees on the dangers of unionization. Managers were given detailed training manuals, or managers' toolboxes, with explicit instructions on how to spot and crush organizing drives. They were taught to identify pro-union employees for special scrutiny and to hold mandatory captive audience meetings where the company would spread anti-union propaganda. But the real work was done in quiet, one-on-one conversations. Managers were trained to probe for employees' personal vulnerabilities. Was a worker struggling with a sick child? A union, the manager would suggest, could disrupt the store's health insurance? Was an employee worried about their hours? A union contract, they'd hint, might force the store to close altogether. It was a strategy designed to create an atmosphere of pervasive fear and mistrust, pitting worker against worker. The message was clear. Your job is at risk if you even talk about organizing. The most infamous example of this strategy came in 2000 in Jacksonville, Texas. The meat-cutting department of a local supercenter, fed up with low wages and poor conditions, successfully voted to form a union, becoming the first and only unionized Walmart department in the United States. Walmart's response was swift, brutal, and designed to send a chilling message across the entire company. Just 2 weeks after the vote, Walmart announced that, as a cost-saving measure, it was eliminating its meat-cutting departments in that store and 179 others across 6 states, switching entirely to prepackaged meat. The newly unionized butchers of Jacksonville were out of a job. The message to Walmart's 1.2 million other U.S. employees was unmistakable. If you organize, your job will simply cease to exist. But crushing unions was only one front in the war to control labor costs. Another, more insidious battle was being fought over the basic rights and dignity of its female employees. In 2001, a 54-year-old greeter from Pittsburgh, California, named Betty Dukes, along with 5 other women, filed a lawsuit that would rock the company to its core. The case, Walmart versus Dukes, grew into the largest civil rights class action lawsuit in American history, representing an astounding 1.5 million current and former female employees. The suit alleged that Walmart engaged in systemic nationwide discrimination against women in both pay and promotions. The evidence unearthed over a decade of legal battles was damning. Internal company records showed that women at Walmart were consistently paid less than men in the same positions, even when they had higher performance ratings and more seniority. Women were heavily concentrated in the lower-paying cashier jobs, while men were steered toward higher-paying roles in management. Female employees testified about being told that men are here to make a career and women are here to make extra money, or that they needed to doll up to get ahead. Ultimately, in 2011, the case reached the Supreme Court, which ruled 5-4 against the women. The court did not rule on whether Walmart had discriminated, but rather on a technicality, deciding that the class of 1.5 million women was simply too large and diverse to be treated as a single group. While Walmart technically won the case, the evidence presented to the world had painted a devastating picture of a corporate culture that systematically undervalued half of its workforce. And the exploitation didn't stop there. Beyond low pay and discrimination, the company faced a wave of lawsuits across the country alleging outright wage theft. Tens of thousands of employees came forward with stories of being forced to work through their unpaid rest breaks and meal periods. An even more shocking accusation was the practice of time shaving, where managers would systematically alter time cards to erase overtime hours that employees had already worked. Perhaps most disturbingly, numerous lawsuits allege that managers, under intense pressure from Bentonville to meet payroll targets, would regularly lock employees inside the store after closing, forcing them to finish cleaning and restocking off the clock, sometimes for hours without pay. In 2008, Walmart agreed to pay up to $640 million to settle 63 different wage theft lawsuits across the country. This relentless war on labor allowed Walmart to maintain a wage and benefit structure that was, for a huge portion of its workforce, a poverty trap. This became one of the most damning secrets of the Walton Empire. Its phenomenally profitable business model was being indirectly, but massively, subsidized by the American taxpayer. Because Walmart paid its employees wages so low that they couldn't afford basic necessities, hundreds of thousands of associates were forced to rely on public assistance programs just to survive. This wasn't just an unfortunate side effect of their business model. There is evidence to suggest it was an integral, calculated part of it. In some states, internal documents and employee testimonies revealed that Walmart had gone so far as to coach new hires on how to apply for government aid. New employee orientation packets would sometimes include applications for food stamps and other public benefits. The unspoken message from the world's largest private employer was clear. Your paycheck from us will not be enough to live on, so here is how you can get the government to make up the difference. Multiple studies from academic institutions and even the U.S. House of Representatives revealed the shocking scale of this phenomenon. In state after state, Walmart was found to be the top employer of recipients of food stamps, now SNAP and Medicaid. A 2013 congressional report revealed that a single 300-person Walmart supercenter cost taxpayers an estimated $900,000 to $1.75 million per year in public assistance benefits, including health care, housing, and food aid. The numbers were staggering. In Ohio, 1 in every 10 Walmart employees was on food stamps. In Georgia, the company had over 10,000 employees, and their dependents enrolled in the state's Medicaid program for children. A 2020 report by the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that Walmart had more employees receiving federal benefits than any other company in the country. The irony was as profound as it was bitter. Walmart is the largest grocer in the world, a company that sells more food than any other entity on the planet. Yet, it paid the very people who stocked its shelves and scanned its products a wage so low that they could not afford to buy enough food for their own families without government help. The hand that scans your groceries often belonged to a person who needed food stamps to buy their own. This reality laid bare the deep hypocrisy at the heart of the Walton Empire, a family whose fortune was built on feeding. America was presiding over a system where a significant portion of its own workforce was going hungry. When confronted with these facts, Walmart's public relations team had a standard defense. They argued that they were providing crucial entry-level jobs to people who might otherwise be unemployed. They claimed their low prices were a powerful anti-poverty program in themselves, saving the average family hundreds of dollars a year. But critics argued this was a smokescreen. The Walmart effect didn't just hollow out Main Street. It created a wage depression across the entire retail sector. As Walmart's dominance grew, their low-wage, low-benefit model became the industry standard. Competitors, from local grocers to national chains, were forced to slash their own wages and benefits just to compete, creating a vicious race to the bottom that lowered the wage floor for millions of American workers. It was a perverse and brilliant system. Walmart kept its labor costs artificially low, which boosted its profits and inflated the Walton family's fortune, while the American public picked up the tab for their workers' health care and food. They had, in effect, privatized the profits and socialized the costs of their own workforce. The everyday low prices that customers saw on the shelves were made possible by a hidden, everyday high tax paid by the rest of society. As their wealth grew into the stratosphere, so did their ambition to shape the world outside their stores. The Walton Family Foundation became one of the largest and most powerful charitable organizations in the world, donating billions of dollars to a variety of causes. On the surface, it was a noble endeavor. But critics soon pointed out that the family's philanthropy came with a very specific and very conservative ideological agenda. Their primary cause was education reform. They became the single largest financial backers of the charter school movement in the United States, pouring billions into creating publicly funded but privately managed schools. This movement, critics argued, was a thinly veiled effort to undermine and ultimately privatize the American public school system. By championing charter schools and school vouchers, they were weakening traditional public schools, and just as importantly, weakening teachers' unions, another form of organized labor the family fundamentally opposed. Their charity was a dual-edged sword. It was a powerful public relations tool, burnishing the family's image as benevolent philanthropists while simultaneously advancing a political vision that would reshape American society according to their own free market principles. To protect this vast and controversial empire, the Waltons quietly became one of the most formidable political forces in the United States. They funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into lobbying efforts and campaign contributions, overwhelmingly to Republican candidates and conservative causes that championed policies beneficial to their bottom line. They spent lavishly to fight against increases in the federal minimum wage, to push for lower corporate tax rates, and to support free trade agreements that made it easier for them to source cheap goods from overseas. Their political influence was a silent, invisible force that ensured the rules in Washington were always written in their favor. It created a friendly regulatory environment for their business practices and systematically silenced any serious attempts at federal legislation that might hold them accountable for their impact on workers and communities. They were not just dominant players in the market. They were using their immense wealth to rig the rules of the game itself. Finally, there was the stark, jarring contrast between the carefully crafted myth of the family and the often messy, entitled reality of their lives. Sam Walton had built his legend on the image of a humble man of the people, but his heirs lived in a different stratosphere entirely. While millions of their employees struggled to make ends meet, the Walton children and grandchildren lived lives of unimaginable luxury, insulated by a wall of wealth from the consequences that governed ordinary people. This was never more apparent than in the life of Alice Walton, Sam's only daughter. While she largely stayed out of the day-to-day operations of Walmart, she became a world-renowned art collector. Yet her life was also marked by a series of disturbing incidents that seemed to highlight a double standard of justice for the ultra-wealthy. In 1983, she lost control of her car on a rainy road in Arkansas, plunging into a ravine and shattering her leg. It was a near-fatal accident that required more than 24 surgeries. In 1989, near Fayetteville, Arkansas, she was speeding when she struck and killed a 50-year-old cannery worker named Oleta Hardin, who had stepped onto the road. Despite witness accounts that Alice was driving too fast, no charges were ever filed. Then, in 1998, she was convicted of driving while intoxicated after crashing her car and reportedly telling the arresting officer, "You know who I am, and don't you?" And again on her 62nd birthday in 2011, she was arrested for DWI in Texas, though the charges were later dropped due to the arresting officer being suspended for misconduct. To the public, it looked like a clear pattern of behavior, a case of affluenza where the consequences of reckless actions could be erased by a team of high-priced lawyers. The chasm between the life of Alice Walton, the billionaire art patron who seemed to exist above the law, and the life of a single mother working as a cashier at one of her family's stores, struggling to feed her children on food stamps, became the ultimate and most damning symbol of the inequality that the Walton Empire had both created and come to represent. Sam Walton died of bone cancer in 1992, just a month after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President George H.W. Bush. He left his wife and 4 children an empire that was already a global force. But the passing of the charismatic, folksy patriarch marked a new era. The founder was gone, and in his place was a colder, more corporate, and infinitely more powerful dynasty. The death of Sam Walton left a profound void, but the machine he built was designed to outlive him. The transition of power to the second generation was seamless, a testament to the structures he had put in place. The 4 Walton children, Rob, John, Jim, and Alice, inherited not just a colossal fortune, but a sacred duty to protect and expand the empire. They were no longer scrappy entrepreneurs fighting for market share. They were custodians of a global throne, a generation born not into struggle, but into the gilded cage of unimaginable wealth and responsibility. The mantle of leadership fell to the eldest son, S. Robson, Rob Walton, a quiet, meticulous, and unassuming lawyer from Columbia Law School. Rob was the temperamental opposite of his charismatic father. Where Sam was a creature of the sales floor, Rob was a man of the boardroom. He had served as the company's legal counsel for years and understood its corporate structure intimately. In 1992, he stepped into his father's role as chairman of the board, a position he would hold for the next 23 years. Under Rob's steady, if uninspired leadership, Walmart entered its most explosive phase of global expansion. He oversaw the company's aggressive push into Mexico with the acquisition of Cifra, into the United Kingdom with the purchase of the ASDA supermarket chain, and into China, laying the groundwork for it to become the largest private employer in both the U.S. and Mexico. Rob lacked his father's motivational flair and his common touch, but he possessed a deep sense of fiduciary duty. He was the protector of the flame, ensuring that the core principles of cost-cutting and ruthless efficiency were maintained and scaled for a new global era. His reign was one of quiet, relentless, and often brutal consolidation of power. His younger brothers, John and Jim, played different but equally vital roles in the family enterprise. John T. Walton was the adventurer, the free spirit of the family. A former Green Beret medic who served in the Vietnam War, he was a decorated war hero and a passionate pilot. After the war, he worked for the company in various roles, but found his true calling in philanthropy and activism. He became one of the nation's leading advocates for school vouchers, pouring hundreds of millions of his personal fortune into the cause, reflecting the family's deep-seated belief in market-based solutions. His life was tragically cut short in 2005. An experienced pilot, he was flying a homemade experimental ultralight aircraft when it crashed shortly after takeoff in Jackson, Wyoming. His sudden death at the age of 58 was a stark reminder of the family's mortality. His massive fortune, then estimated at over $18 billion, passed to his wife Christy and their only son Lucas, making Christy, for a time, the richest woman in the world, wealthiest woman in the world. Jim Walton, the youngest son, emerged as arguably the most astute and low-key businessman of his generation, inheriting his father's sharp financial mind and legendary frugality. While he served on the Walmart board for many years, his primary domain was the family's other, less-known powerhouse, Arvest Bank. What started as a small local bank in Bentonville that Sam had purchased to serve the family's financial needs, Jim transformed into a regional banking giant. Through a series of shrewd acquisitions, He grew Arvest into a multi-billion-dollar institution with hundreds of branches across Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. He represented the family's deep financial roots, the quiet, immense banking power that underpinned their retail empire and anchored their vast fortune. And then there was Alice Walton, the only daughter, who famously and decisively forged her own path. Declaring early on that the day-to-day grind of retail held no interest for her, she dedicated her life and her fortune to her one true all-consuming passion, art. For decades, she operated as one of the most powerful and secretive buyers in the high-stakes art world, amassing a breathtaking collection of American masterpieces, from colonial-era portraits to modern abstract works. Her crowning achievement and her monumental gift to the world was the 2011 opening of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Nestled in a stunning 120-acre wooded ravine in the heart of Bentonville, the magnificent architectural marvel designed by Moshe Safdie was funded entirely by her personal fortune. It was an act of philanthropy on a scale rarely seen, a determined effort to bring world-class art to the American heartland. She single-handedly turned a small Arkansas town into a global art destination, and with its free admission policy, made a canon of great American art accessible to a population that had been largely ignored by the coastal cultural elites. Yet for all its undeniable beauty and civic generosity, the museum also stood as a monument to the family's profound contradictions. It was a palace of high culture, funded by the profits from a business model that critics argued was crippling the very kind of American middle class whose artists the museum celebrated. It was a testament to one woman's refined taste, paid for by a million low-wage jobs. The transition of power to the third generation marked another critical evolution for the dynasty. The family understood that to maintain control in the turbulent 21st century, they needed to adapt and project a more modern image. In 2015, after 23 years at the helm, Rob Walton stepped down as chairman. But in a move that demonstrated the family's continued iron grip, he did not appoint an outsider. He passed the torch to his son-in-law, Greg Penner. Penner, a polished and tech-savvy executive with a Stanford MBA and a background in finance at Goldman Sachs and in Silicon Valley, represented a new, more worldly face for the family's leadership. The move was a clear signal. The bloodline and the control it represented was still paramount, but it was willing to embrace a more contemporary style of management to navigate the existential threat posed by the rise of e-commerce and the dominance of Amazon. The quiet kings of Bentonville were preparing for a new kind of war. Looking back across the decades, the story of the Walton Dynasty is a powerful, poignant reminder that no empire, no matter how great, is built without a cost. It is not a simple linear story of progress, but a dramatic saga of relentless ambition, brilliant innovation, and the often unseen consequences of absolute victory. Sam Walton was a genius, a visionary who saw the future of retail and harnessed the deep-seated desires of the American consumer with unparalleled skill. He was the ultimate embodiment of the American dream he preached, a man who rose from the poverty of the Dust Bowl to become the richest man in the world through sheer grit and determination. He created millions of jobs, pioneered logistical and technological systems that transformed global commerce, and undeniably saved American families countless billions of dollars, providing access to affordable food and goods that, for many, raised their standard of living. But that same shining legacy is inextricably linked to the hollowing out of American towns, the systematic suppression of workers' rights, and the creation of a low-wage service economy that has dramatically exacerbated economic inequality. The machine he built, so perfectly tuned to deliver value to the customer, was often callously indifferent to its human cost. The Walton family's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the very nature of modern capitalism. What is the real price of a bargain? Is a system that allows one family to accumulate more wealth than the bottom 40% of their own country combined a system that is truly just? And what is our own responsibility as consumers for the consequences of the low prices we so eagerly demand? The story of the Walton family is not just about the making of a store. It is about the making of modern America. It's about the complexities of family, the immense burden of inheritance, and the relentless, unforgiving logic of the market. As the third generation now guides this colossal empire through a world being rapidly transformed by technology and social change, they carry with them the ghosts of their past, the genius of the founder, the destruction of Main Street, the triumphs of global expansion, and the quiet struggles of the millions of associates who make it all possible. Their journey is the next chapter in a great American story, one that is far from over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Walton Dynasty. It's a story that reminds us that in the ledger of history, every price, every bargain, and every great fortune has a story. And some of those stories cast very long and very dark shadows indeed. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that look behind the legends. We'll see you next time